If I had my druthers, I would never speak about Vietnam. I would just stay in my cave, read my books, take care of my flowers, and but I know that that's not the reason I survived. The Friendship Village, aside from my son and Rosie, is the most important thing in my life. An extended family, a place from the beginning for me of reconciliation, of healing, of hope. Also, an important point for me is that we can make a difference in life. And I think the Friendship Village personifies that.
The Vietnam War ended more than 25 years ago, but the wounds of war take a long time to heal. On a former rice paddy outside Hanoi, a new legacy of the war is under construction. Founded in 1992, the Vietnam Friendship Village is a treatment center and community housing more than 70 children and veterans with illnesses attributed to Agent Orange. The U.S. Air Force sprayed Agent Orange during the war to remove Vietnam's dense jungles. The Vietnamese believe the dioxin in Agent Orange is responsible for more than 1 million birth defects. But the Vietnam Friendship Village is more than a place of physical healing. It is also a vision of peace, realized in the hearts and minds of those who are building it.
Well, I'm here with a bunch of Americans that are active with the International Village, Friendship Village. I came to Vietnam to come back and visit it after all these years since the war. And it gives you a whole new perspective. You know, I'm really glad that I've made this trip. Aren't you?
I was a medical advisor, a supervisor in the war in Hue. I did bits and pieces, and I sort of achieved a bit here and a bit there, and I come away dissatisfied with the work that I did. You know, I do things differently now, but now I've got this opportunity to help out here, which would be great.
Like now we have Germany, France, USA, England, Australia, and Japan. But our whole ideal here is to help the kids, and this is about peace and reconciliation. It's about people who have killed each other and fought and can come together and be brothers again. And especially now with what's going on in Afghanistan, we have to understand that we can come together and we don't have to kill each other and we don't have to hurt each other. There are ways, but we have to work at it and we have to find it and we have to put ourselves out to do this. Right now, the children we work with mostly, we feel they can be rehabilitated. But now we want to build this new house over here for the kids that are so severely damaged they can't really be helped. All you can do is work with them.
Agent Orange has also affected the health of veterans exposed to the herbicide, including George Mizo, the village's founder. To him, the Friendship Village is a living symbol of the potential for transformation that began with his journey to heal the wounds of war.
When I went to Vietnam, I knew none of the history of Vietnam. None of us did at that time. Our country didn't even know any of the history of it. Was a disaster from the very beginning.
Asia and the Western Pacific is a vitally important part of the world to the United States. Not only does this area contain a large percentage of all mankind and tremendous resources, but also it is a place where the communists are making vigorous and ruthless aggression.
Before the war against the United States, Vietnam's struggle for independence had included over 2,000 years of invasion by the Chinese, French, and Japanese. But in 1954, at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, Vietnamese nationalists led by Ho Chi Minh defeated their French landowners, ending 100 years of colonial rule. The Vietnamese had finally won independence, but freedom would come at a higher price.
If Indochina goes, several things happen right away. The Krop Peninsula, the last little bit of end hanging on down there, would be scarcely defensible. The tin and the tungsten that we so greatly value from that area would cease coming. So you see, somewhere along the line, this must be blocked.
I grew up believing that the United States was a great country. I mean, one of my first recollections is when Eisenhower was running for president. I was sitting on my father's shoulders, and he said, these are the men who saved the free world. These are the men who stopped Hitler, Stalin, the Japanese. So I grew up believing, you know, we were the good guys.
I think we're on the wrong side. This is no time to think.
As the son of a Native American, George had grown up with images of American valor and patriotism, from the Wild West to Washington, D.C.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Inspired by his president's words, in 1963, George enlisted in the U.S. Army, where he served stateside until his discharge in 1966. Since the 1950s, the American government had been conducting a covert war in Vietnam. By 1965, it had escalated into an open conflict.
United States Marines head for security duty in South Vietnam, where they will guard the American jet airfield against attack by Viet Cong guerrillas and infiltrators from North Vietnam, only 80 miles away.
So we must be ready to fight in Vietnam, but the ultimate victory will depend upon the hearts and the minds of the people who actually live out there.
The U.S. never officially declared war on Vietnam, but by 1967, the war drums were beating loudly, and George decided to re-enlist.
I felt that if my country was at war, I had to serve. My only conditions was that I be in Vietnam within 5 days, and that I be assigned to a unit that was going to see a lot of combat. And I got my wish.
As a platoon sergeant in the combat zone, the all-American soldier began to question his country's motives in the war.
In the first few months, Most of our battles centered around recapturing from the Viet Cong large plantations. And that was a shock to me. I had no idea that the United States had any financial interest in Vietnam.
Then, in mid-67, the American mission changed from harassment and interdiction to search and destroy. Any village found hiding medical supplies, extra food, tunnels, or weapons was destroyed.
So here we are killing the very people and destroying the very country that I thought we were coming over to protect. You know, I became aware that the Vietnamese are an incredible people. I realized that they had an ancient culture and that they were a very peaceful people. So to be in that position was horrible.
By the fall of 1967, the 22-year-old sergeant and his men had moved into the Khe Son Valley, where they were told that 4,000 North Vietnamese troops were trapped. The real number was 40,000.
But for us, it was like whistling, walking by a cemetery. We knew it was just a matter of time before we were overrun.
George's platoon fought around the clock and lost many men. By that point, the war had claimed so many casualties that the American government began to draft college students. One of them was named Wilbur.
It was around Christmas, but I got a young man named Wilbur, African-American, and he had only been with me for a day or two, and he asked to speak with me privately. He said, "My religion forbids me to kill." And I said, "I come from a Christian home also. And I was raised to believe that it was wrong to kill too, except in war, except for your country." He said, "No, it doesn't say that in the commandments. Thou shalt not kill except for communists. Thou shalt not kill except for people who disagree with our government. It says thou shalt not kill, period. Boom."
As Wilbur began to voice his conscience, George began to hear his own misgivings about the war.
Then he asked me to help get him sent home. And I thought about it, and I thought about it. I mean, these weren't just my men. These were friends. I mean, these were brothers. And I had a tremendous amount of pain for all of the friends that I had lost, or who had lost arms or legs or both. So after weighing all of this, I told Wilbur, we all would like to go home. We're all terrified. And this is horrible. It's a terrible mistake. But I don't feel that I could live with my conscience helping you get sent home and leaving these other men here to die. So I told him no.
On the night of January 3rd, the North Vietnamese hit all 3 American bases in George's area in an opening salvo of the 1968 Tet Offensive. Wounded by one of the first rockets, George continued to fight through the night.
all night long. You just can't believe it.
It was just unbelievable. The one thing I can't remember from that night is where Wilbur was. I assigned Wilbur to be with me because I knew he was afraid, but he wasn't there. But during that battle, I had another experience. I don't know how to describe it. For the first time, I saw clearly. In the middle of this battle, it was like everything stopped and I was looking at a movie. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I remember saying, this is bullshit. This isn't about democracy versus communism. This isn't God's will. This is bullshit. This is hard, created by man for whatever reasons, politicians, or greed, or whatever. And at that instant, I knew that I would survive.
At sunrise, a commanding officer ordered the wounded sergeant to be medevaced out.
And I was so torn. When I said, I'm not going, we came together. And he said, yes, you are. That's an order. So I got on the helicopter and was flown to the hospital in July, and then to Japan, and then to Fort Lewis, Washington. And it was some time during that time period when I learned that my unit had been overrun. And that they had all been killed. And that's when I made a conscious decision to protest the war and to refuse to be a soldier.
The decorated war hero returned home to find his wife pregnant with another man's baby, his father dying from Lou Gehrig's disease, and his country torn apart by the war in Vietnam.
I came back with an incredible amount of anger, and not at the Vietnamese, but at my government.
Arrested and imprisoned by the U.S. Army after speaking out against the war, he was eventually released in 1971. During the next 15 years, he earned a psychology degree, worked as an activist and chef, and, like the rest of the country, tried to put the Vietnam War behind him.
What we're seeing is the end of the post-Vietnam syndrome, the return of realism about the communist danger. Think what signal we'll be sending to the rest of the world when and if this aid to the freedom fighters in Nicaragua is passed.
In the 1980s, George and other Vietnam veterans began to recognize an all-too-familiar pattern taking shape in the jungles of Central America. In 1986, he and 3 other veterans turned in their war medals and staged a 47-day fast on the steps of the U.S. Capitol to raise awareness about American involvement in Nicaragua.
Our guiding principles was the Nuremberg laws, that when a government acts contrary to the will of the law, the people not only have a right, they have a responsibility to speak out and to stop that violation.
And we, especially as veterans, I feel have a strong moral obligation to stop the killing, and we're willing to put our lives on the line. So that's what we're doing by our statements, with our fast, and in renouncing our methods. Thank you all for being here.
When I sat down on the steps of the Capitol in Washington, we knew what the Reagan administration was doing. We knew about the covert activities and the Contras and the death squads, and that administration is in violation of my country's laws. And that's why we sat down on the steps and we said, we're not moving.
They say they will die to make their point.
We want the American government to know that there are at least 4 Americans who care enough about what's being done in their name to make a sacrifice for it. We've done it for war, and if I can't do it, we can't do it for peace, and my life has no meaning.
On the 47th day of the fast, a doctor told the veterans that if they continued, George would die within the week. Having achieved their goal of raising public awareness, they decided to end the fast.
The Veterans Fast for Life, for me, was very, very significant for a lot of reasons. And one was that I saw what people can do. It ended up with us getting over 10,000 letters a day, and people came to the steps by the thousands.
When did you hear about them?
I met George at the Peace Pilgrimage in summer in Germany.
And learned he was going to do this.
And then I heard about it fast, and then I tried to support it in Germany, and then I decided to come here.
And that's when I realized it was people bringing people together and stopping war and creating the opportunities for reconciliation and for healing. But that experience made me aware how desperate people were to see it was possible. And that's when I started working for peace and justice for all people and building the Village of Friendship as an example of what people can do if they set aside those differences and work together.
The roots of the Friendship Village stem from the desire of veterans from France, Japan, Great Britain, the United States, and Vietnam, who have come to the conclusion that we must find non-violent means to resolve conflict, and who want the Friendship Village to be an example of how people from different countries, different cultures, and different backgrounds, even former enemies, can put aside those differences to work together to create something that represents hope, healing, reconciliation.
The very first meeting for the Village of Friendship was in Paris, and I remember how they came out and said, let's create a village. And it was like, wow, that's a great idea. not having the slightest idea of how this is going to work out and how you make it from this idea and this dream into something that would really work and be as helpful as it was intended.
Quand nous avons eu cette idée, on nous a pris un peu pour des gens un peu fous, même peut-être très fous, parce que l'idée était belle, mais beaucoup de gens n'y croyaient pas. C'était d'abord, au départ, sur l'avenir heureux de l'humanité.
To oversee the project, the Vietnamese government created Vietnam's first veterans organization, electing General Tran Van Quang as its president. General Quang had been the field commander of all troops in Georgia's area during the war. He was also the man who had planned and led the battle at Quai Son, killing George Maizo's entire platoon.
The battle that I described previously, the Battle of Quai Son, General Quang was leading that battle and actually fighting in it. And we've talked a lot about it after that night, over the years.
Đúng là trong cái thời chiến tranh á, thì tôi cũng không biết anh Mizo là ở đâu. Nhưng mà trong làm thiết kế một cái trận chiến đấu, sẽ đánh xong rồi, kết quả sau này gặp nhau, kể lại thì mới biết rằng lúc đó là tôi và anh Mizo là hai người gặp nhau ở trên mặt trận. Không có thể biết nhau trước được. Nhưng mà rất may rằng là chúng tôi lại được gặp nhau sau hòa bình và làm bạn với nhau.
He's a beautiful human being. We formed a bond over the years. It's just never in my wildest expectations would I have believed in. Thank you. He said, please, when you go back to the United States, tell the American people, we don't hate the American people. We did not drop our troops into the cornfields of Ohio or into this beautiful country to kill their children.
Chúng tôi luôn luôn nhận thức rằng người Mỹ là có hai lớp người khác nhau. Một lớp người là đại đa số nhân dân Mỹ là tốt, là những người bạn của chúng tôi. Chúng tôi nhớ luôn hình ảnh của hàng trăm, hàng chục ngàn người Mỹ biểu tình để phản đối cuộc chiến tranh ở Việt Nam. Chỉ còn một thiểu số là đại biểu cho những cái công ty độc quyền về vũ khí, đó là những người ham muốn chiến tranh xâm lược.
More bombs were dropped over Vietnam and neighboring Laos and Cambodia than all of Europe during World War II. Unexploded bombs and landmines still litter the Vietnamese countryside, killing and maiming over 2,000 people each year. But the war's most insidious legacy lives on in the soil. To uncover the enemy, the American military sprayed more than 72 million liters of the herbicide Agent Orange over Vietnam's jungles.
We had no idea when we were in Vietnam what they were spraying. I was told it was a mosquito spray, harmless, don't worry about it.
Today, vast areas of South Vietnam remain contaminated with dioxin, a component of the defoliant and one of the deadliest chemicals known to mankind.
Và cái chất thứ hai là cái chất trắng. Cái diện tích mà chất độc hóa học phủ xuống
Việt Nam là 2.924.934 hectare.
An American soldier like myself, I was here from about mid-68 till June of 69. I was actually sprayed. I used to see the planes flying over. We used to drink the water, and it would be in the water. But I was only here for a year. A lot of these soldiers were here. They were sprayed for 10 years. But still, there's a lot of American veterans, a lot of Australian and Korean veterans who have physical problems, and their children have problems. So I've had no physical problem I know of, but my wife had 2 miscarriages. So for that Agent Orange, we don't know.
In the areas sprayed, what was once triple canopy jungle has been reduced to invasive grasses and shrubs. Scientists estimate the dioxin will remain in the soil for 400 to 500 years.
So if we go across, find ourselves the drainage ditch from the base, walk across and up a little, we should get it.
We started doing our dioxin research in Vietnam in 1994, which was only a couple of years after the country had opened up to the outside world. We transferred our knowledge and expertise in dioxin research in Canada on pulp mills to the situation here in Vietnam. We chose the Alloway Valley as our study area, particularly because it is a very isolated area. It's a very strategic location on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was very heavily bombed and sprayed repeatedly with Agent Orange throughout the American War.
Okay, so I'm just probing for a location that has no resistance. So when we take a sample, we're not going to hit anything dangerous. This area was bombed, and perhaps there's bombies or unexploded ordnance here. The main threat that we're concerned about is mines. They have an immediate reaction if you step on them.
There we go. Following our surveys, we nailed it down that dioxins were especially prevalent in very high concentrations around the former Asso military base, and it was especially found in high concentrations in the soils as well as in the duck fat and fish fat. The levels we're finding in people here in Alloway are amongst the highest in the world. We've also shown through some preliminary studies that the rates of birth defects here are higher than in other areas of Vietnam. You're seeing long-term impacts of Agent Orange and dioxin through many generations, I guess for a couple reasons. One is genetics passing from soldiers and people who are exposed, passing it on to their children. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, is you're also seeing continual exposure in the environment to this day. The cultivation of the fields in these highly contaminated areas, it wakes up the dioxin that's buried in the soils. This has then now made it readily available to the people. It's entering their bodies, and then they are passing the dioxin to their children just through the genes or also through the breast milk. The only real means of removing dioxins from the soil is through burning or incineration. It would cost billions of dollars. What can be done, and what we have been doing here, is trying to educate people through awareness programs, trying to teach the residents how to avoid contamination. We've clearly demonstrated that 35 years following the spraying in Vietnam, it's still an issue. It's not a historical issue. It's an issue that's still affecting people to this day. What we haven't been able to demonstrate is the direct linkage between Agent Orange concentrations in people and birth defects. The U.S. is currently negotiating with the Vietnamese to this end, but these negotiations will take years to be completed.
Dạ có ạ, bố cháu đi bộ đội từ năm 68 ạ, ở trong chiến trường là 6 năm. Sau khi về một thời gian thì bố cháu cũng sinh sống bình thường như người dân thôi. Thì đến sinh được 2 cháu đầu thì đến cháu thứ tư, thứ ba là bắt đầu bị trường hợp như thế này ạ. Rồi vừa rồi đến tháng vừa rồi này ở tỉnh mới đưa đi xét nghiệm thì sức khỏe là giảm, không có khả năng lao động nữa rồi ạ.
Không bị sốt.
Không bị sốt à?
Chỉ ho
thôi gì?
Sau thời gian về chỉ có thấy là nó ngứa, tự nhiên ngứa, còn đau đầu với đau thần kinh bây giờ là suốt bây giờ đấy, nó kiểu nó nóng hết ngoài da là có cái hiện tượng, rồi các cái đốt tai là ngẫy ngang đấy. Tôi có 4 cháu, thế nhưng mà bị 3 đứa bị ảnh hưởng, một đứa mất.
Họ giải chất độc cháu cảm thấy nghĩ là buồn ạ, buồn vì bọn cháu bị bệnh ạ.
In my case, in 74, I suddenly got this huge rash. I got delirious. My feel was like 105. The bottom line was, we don't know what it is, but something's killing your immune system. So that was the first inkling that I had been exposed to Agent Orange.
George is definitely one of the bravest person I've ever met. I don't know if I would be in his situation, whether I would even manage to make it through one single day. The effects of Agent Orange are that his immune system doesn't work anymore, so he gets every infection that's flying around, which is really difficult because both of his heart attacks happened during an infection.
I'm great.
Good.
George's anti-war activities made him ineligible for veterans benefits until 1998. After his first heart attack in 1987, he and his new family decided to live in Germany, where he could receive the medical care he needed.
George also, as a late consequence of all the poison in his body, has constant pain, especially in the joints. We also know that a third heart attack is very dangerous and he might not survive it, and that's a constant fear.
You don't need to be afraid. We're not gonna hurt you.
In January next year, we're gonna be having a 10-year anniversary of the German group. Our main job was basically to raise money, and we started very small, and we're still not really a large group. We do a lot of fundraising with concerts, with bake sales, with flea markets, with little actions of people.
These beautiful human beings are doing what the project is all about. Their way of sharing, caring about those who don't have what we may have.
The original plan was that the whole village would cost $2.5 million, and we've raised a large part of that already. We have 8 family houses, we have the clinic, we have the school, we are building a house for severely handicapped children, and I think we've come a long way.
The International Committee intends that the village will become self-sustaining. In the meantime, committee members continue to raise money through grassroots efforts. Ironically, the American committee has raised the least amount of money. To the International Committee, it is a sign that the wounds of war have yet to heal.
Americans, for 40 years now, Vietnam has been the big pink elephant in the living room that everybody doesn't want to see, but is there. There's a lot of healing that has to go on if we're to get beyond that pain. But to be able to get beyond that, we have to confront our fears. Confronting our fears means meeting, sharing, learning how to trust with our former enemies. And it's very hard. It's very hard.
They come from the war, and after the war they return to their village, and now they have two children, and one of them is inside his house and problem with the mental.
Now the youngest brother is starting to develop similar symptoms.
I was just curious, is he like this all the time, day and night, or is it excited because we're here?
Vâng, cả đêm quá. Nửa đêm cháu thức dậy là cháu cũng...
All day and all night.
It never ends. You know, the war never ends. It's just kind of still going on, and it's still hurting people, and it's still killing people, and it's just, you know. I mean, it was bad enough, the suffering that was then, but, you know, to see that it's still going on today, it makes me angry, makes me feel guilty. And it makes you feel so damn impotent, I guess the word. You know, you just can't, there's nothing you can do.
I believe very firmly what Gandhi said. It may seem insignificant what we do, but it's important that we do it. Hope is an illusion. If you want to create something, you have to actively work it and not hope that somebody else, somehow, some miracle is going to happen and people will come to their senses or whatever. We either will create a world of peace or we won't. But it's our choice. Just in my lifetime, I've watched the American people, for the first time in history, stop a war in progress. I've watched the civil rights movement go from when I was a child, segregation was the law. I've watched the American people stop the production of 112 nuclear power plants. None of these were started by huge organizations, by superheroes or heroines. Each and every one of those was started by one, two, or a handful of people who said no.
Tôi nghĩ rằng cái làng Hữu Nghị cũng như là nhiều cái công trình giống như làng Hữu Nghị sẽ nhắc nhở chúng ta một cái điều là không nên gây ra chiến tranh, nên hòa bình hợp tác với nhau để cho không những thế hệ của chúng ta mà cả thế hệ con cháu của chúng ta cùng được sống yên lành, vui vẻ và có cuộc sống tốt đẹp.
Le village, c'est une toute petite lumière dans ce tunnel dans lequel nous sommes actuellement. Mais avec une petite lumière, on va quelquefois vers le soleil.
There's an old Jewish saying, he or she who saves one saves the world. And I know that together we can literally stop that progression of what is in fact a suicide of this planet. I really believe what Gandhi said, that, evil can only exist when good people do nothing. We can make a difference, each and every one of us.